3 racist cops thought she was an easy mark, a black woman walking her dog alone at dusk. They moved to corner her, their intentions menacingly clear. What they hadn't factored into their cruel equation: her loyal companion wasn't just a pet. He was a retired military K-9, trained for combat and fiercely protective. Their intimidation was about to become their terror. Welcome, friends, viewers, and seekers of justice. The story we are about to share with you today is a chilling reminder of how quickly a peaceful moment can turn perilous, and how courage can manifest in the most unexpected and formidable forms. This isn't merely a tale of harassment and survival. It's an exploration of loyalty, specialized training, and the profound bond between a woman and her extraordinary protector. If you are joining our community for the first time, we warmly invite you to let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always inspiring to feel the global reach of these narratives. And if stories that challenge injustice, celebrate hidden strengths, and affirm the power of resilience resonate with you, please consider subscribing to our channel and activating the notification bell. We are dedicated to bringing forward compelling stories that deserve to be heard, and to fostering a community that stands against prejudice. Your support is deeply valued. Thank you for being here. Now, let us delve into the harrowing evening walk of Dr. Aris Thorne and her remarkable dog, Valor. The coastal city of Port Royal, California, presented a postcard image of idyllic West Coast living. Sun-drenched beaches met dramatic cliffs, upscale boutiques lined palm-fringed avenues, and a general sense of affluent tranquility pervaded its meticulously maintained neighborhoods. It was a city that prided itself on its progressive values and its picturesque charm, a haven for wealthy retirees, tech entrepreneurs, and those seeking a slower, more refined pace of life. Yet, beneath this gleaming, sun-kissed veneer, like an insidious current beneath a placid ocean surface, older, uglier prejudices sometimes stirred, particularly within the ranks of its often insular and occasionally aggressive police department. Dr. Aris Thorne, a woman of 58, was a relatively new resident of Port Royal, having moved there 2 years prior after a distinguished career as a professor of sociolinguistics at a prestigious East Coast university. She was a woman of sharp intellect, quiet intensity, and an inherent elegance that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with her composed, thoughtful demeanor. She had chosen Port Royal for its natural beauty and its promise of peaceful retirement, a place where she could finally dedicate herself to writing her long-planned monograph on the language of power and resistance. Aris was a black woman, a scholar, a widow, and intensely private. Her small, beautifully appointed craftsman bungalow, perched on a bluff overlooking a secluded cove, was her sanctuary, her constant companion, and indeed her most cherished link to her late husband, Marcus, was Valor. Valor was no ordinary dog. He was a magnificent Belgian Malinois, a breed renowned for its intelligence, agility, and unwavering loyalty. His sleek, fawn-colored coat rippled over a frame of pure, coiled muscle, and his dark, almond-shaped eyes held an almost unnerving level of perception. Valor was a retired military working dog, MWD, a veteran of 2 arduous tours in Afghanistan, where he had served alongside Marcus, who had been a K-9 handler in an elite Special Forces unit. Marcus had often joked that Valor was smarter than half his platoon and twice as brave. After Marcus was tragically killed by an IED, Valor, also injured in the blast but recovering, had been deemed unsuitable for further combat deployment due to a subtle but discernible shift in his temperament, a heightened sensitivity, an almost melancholic watchfulness. Through a series of compassionate interventions by Marcus's former commanding officer, Valor had been honorably discharged and entrusted to Aris's care. He was more than a pet. He was a living legacy, a furry, four-legged embodiment of her husband's courage and devotion, and a highly trained protector whose skills, though dormant, were deeply ingrained. Aris understood, perhaps better than anyone, the complex soul that resided within Valor. She knew his triggers, his capabilities, and the profound depth of his loyalty. Their bond was silent, intuitive, and absolute. Their evenings were invariably marked by a ritual, a long walk along the scenic cliffside path that snaked above the crashing Pacific surf as the sun began its spectacular descent into the ocean. It was a time for Aris to clear her head, to commune with the wild beauty of the coast, and for Valor to stretch his powerful legs, his senses alive to every scent and sound, a silent, vigilant guardian at her side. He was always on a sturdy leather leash, his movements a paradigm of controlled power and grace. However, in recent months, a subtle but unsettling change had crept into the atmosphere of Port Royal, or at least into Aris's perception of it. There were more lingering stares from certain residents, fewer friendly waves from passing cars, and more disturbingly, there was the increasingly frequent presence of a particular Port Royal Police Department patrol car, Unit 7, often manned by the same trio of officers, Sergeant Dale Bulldog Brody, Officer Rick Fowler, and Officer Mitch Callahan. Brody was the ringleader, a man in his late 40s with a beefy physique, a florid complexion, and eyes that seemed to hold a perpetual sneer. He was known for his aggressive, proactive policing style, which many in the city's minority communities recognized as a euphemism for harassment and racial profiling. Fowler was his younger, eager-to-please acolyte, quick to laugh at Brody's crude jokes and ape his domineering manner. Callahan was the quiet one, more observant perhaps, but his silence often read as complicity. Aris had first noticed them about 3 months prior. Unit 7 would slow down conspicuously as it passed her during her walks. Sometimes it would be parked inexplicably at the end of her quiet cul-de-sac. The officers just sitting, watching. They never said anything directly to her, not at first. It was a campaign of subtle intimidation, of making her presence feel scrutinized, unwelcome. Aris, a scholar of power dynamics, recognized the tactic instantly. It was designed to unsettle, to make her question her right to occupy space, to make her shrink. She refused to give them the satisfaction. She continued her walks, her posture erect, her gaze direct if they happened to catch her eye, Valor a calm, steady presence beside her. She knew with a chilling certainty that their attention was not benign. On a particularly beautiful Tuesday evening in late September, as the sky bled into breathtaking hues of orange, crimson, and violet, Aris and Valor embarked on their usual cliffside walk. The air was soft, carrying the scent of salt and coastal sage. Valor, as always, was a picture of canine alertness, his ears swiveling, his intelligent eyes scanning their surroundings. Aris felt a familiar sense of peace settle over her as they moved along the winding dirt path, the rhythmic crash of the waves below a soothing counterpoint to her thoughts. They reached the furthest point of their usual route, a secluded promontory known locally as Seal Point, where a weathered wooden bench offered a panoramic view of the setting sun. As Aris paused to drink in the beauty, Valor suddenly stiffened. A low, almost inaudible growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound Aris had learned to recognize as a serious warning. His ears were perked, his head cocked, his entire body a study in focused tension, his gaze fixed on a dense thicket of cypress trees that bordered the inland side of the path, about 50 yards back from where they stood. Aris's own senses immediately went on high alert. She followed Valor's gaze, but saw nothing, heard nothing beyond the wind and the waves. "What is it, boy?" she murmured, her hand instinctively tightening on his leash. Before Valor could offer further canine intelligence, The answer to her question emerged from the cypress grove. Not one, but three figures, their dark blue uniforms almost camouflaged in the deepening twilight. It was Sergeant Brody, Officer Fowler, and Officer Callahan. They hadn't arrived in their cruiser. They were on foot, and they had clearly been waiting, concealed, for her. The premeditation of it sent a genuine chill down Aris's spine. This was no casual encounter. This was an ambush. They fanned out slightly as they approached, their movements deliberate, almost predatory, effectively cutting off her easiest line of retreat back along the narrow cliff path. Brody was in the center, a smug, unpleasant smirk already playing on his lips. Fowler flanked him to the right, his hand casually resting on his holstered taser. Callahan, to the left, was a little further back, his expression unreadable in the fading light, but his presence contributing to the sense of being surrounded. "Well, well, well, Dr. Thorne, isn't it?" Sergeant Brody began, his voice dripping with a false, mocking joviality. "Fancy meeting you out here all alone in the dark with your big dog." He let his gaze linger on Valor with a look that was clearly meant to be intimidating. Valor, in turn, met Brody's stare with an unwavering, intelligent intensity, his low growl now a more audible, guttural rumble. "Good evening, Sergeant Brody, officers," Aris replied, her voice remarkably calm and even, betraying none of the sudden, cold apprehension that had gripped her. She stood her ground, one hand firmly on Valor's leash, the other resting lightly on the dog's powerful shoulder, a subtle gesture of reassurance for both of them. "Is there something I can help you with? It's rather unusual to see you patrolling this remote section of the cliffs on foot and without your vehicle." Brody chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Just doing our due diligence, Doctor, keeping the community safe. We've had some reports, you see. Complaints about a woman walking a potentially aggressive, intimidating-looking dog in this area, especially after dark. Makes people nervous. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Aris's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sergeant, Valor is always on a leash, as he is now. He is a highly trained, exceptionally well-behaved animal. He is not aggressive unless provoked or unless I am threatened. The only intimidation I have experienced in this neighborhood has been the repeated, unwarranted surveillance by your particular patrol unit. Are you suggesting that I am the subject of these supposed complaints?" Now, Doctor, no need to get defensive," Fowler interjected with a sneer, taking a step closer. "We're just having a friendly chat, making sure everything's copacetic." He deliberately let his gaze drop to Valor, then back to Aris. "That is a serious-looking animal you got there. What kind of training did you say he had?" "I didn't say," Aris replied coolly. "But since you ask, he is a retired military working dog. His training was extensive." She deliberately kept her tone neutral, offering the information as a statement of fact, not a threat. Callahan, who had remained silent until now, shifted his weight, his eyes flicking nervously between Valor and his more aggressive colleagues. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then seemed to think better of it, a flicker of unease crossing his face. Brody, however, seemed to take Aris's revelation about Valor's background as a challenge. The smirk on his face widened. "Military, huh? So he's trained to attack then? Trained to take people down?" He took another deliberate step forward, closing the distance between them, clearly attempting to intimidate. Valor's growl deepened, his body tensing further, a low, powerful vibration that Aris could feel through the leash, and her hand on his shoulder. He was a coiled spring, ready to unleash. "Sergeant," Aris said, her voice dropping to a lower, firmer register, a warning note now clearly audible. "You are making me uncomfortable. You are deliberately attempting to provoke my dog. I am asking you and your officers to please step back and allow us to continue our walk peacefully." Or what, Doctor? Brody taunted, his face now inches from hers, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and something sour. You gonna sick your attack dog on us? Is that the plan? Because I gotta tell you, that wouldn't end well for you or for him. He gestured vaguely towards his own sidearm. It was then that Officer Fowler, emboldened by Brody's aggression and Aris's perceived vulnerability as a lone woman, made a critical, colossally stupid mistake. Thinking to assert his own dominance, or perhaps to impress Brody, he reached out suddenly, his hand aiming not for Aris, but for Valor's collar, perhaps intending to grab the leash or to physically intimidate the dog. It happened in less than a heartbeat. Before Fowler's hand was even halfway to its target, before Aris could even utter a command, Valor exploded into action. It was not a panicked, uncontrolled lunge. It was a movement of devastating speed, precision, and controlled power, the result of years of intensive military training designed for exactly such a scenario, protecting his handler from an imminent, direct physical threat. Valor didn't bark. He didn't snarl in the conventional sense. There was a sound, a deep, terrifying, guttural exhalation of air combined with a teeth-baring display that was far more menacing than any bark. He moved not forward but upward and slightly to the side, intercepting Fowler's outstretched arm not with a full bite, but with a powerful bone-jarring muzzle punch and a snap of his formidable jaws that closed on empty air a mere fraction of an inch from Fowler's invading hand. The sheer force of the muzzle impact sent a shockwave up Fowler's arm, and the terrifying clack of those powerful teeth so close to his flesh made him shriek, a high-pitched, undignified sound of pure terror. He stumbled backwards, clutching his arm, his face instantly ashen, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. The suddenness and ferocity of Valor's defensive action, though perfectly controlled and non-injurious in its execution, a testament to his training, a warning, not a mauling, stunned all three officers into momentary shocked silence. Even Brody took an involuntary step back, his smug expression wiped clean from his face, replaced by a look of genuine alarm. Callahan, further back, looked utterly horrified, his hand instinctively going to his own weapon. In that frozen instant, with Fowler whimpering and clutching his arm, Aris Thorne spoke, her voice cutting through the sudden, tense silence, as cold and sharp as the Pacific wind whipping around the cliff edge. "Valor, stand down, watch!" The command was delivered in a low, unwavering tone, the specialized vocabulary of a K-9 handler. Valor, despite the adrenaline clearly coursing through him, responded instantly. He didn't fully relax. His body remained a taut, quivering monument to readiness, his gaze still locked on the officers, particularly Brody, but he ceased any overt display of aggression, dropping back slightly to position himself directly in front of Aris, a living, breathing shield of muscle and focused intent. His message was unequivocal. The line had been drawn, and he would defend it with his life. The three officers stared, not just at the dog, but at Dr. Aris Thorne, the woman they had intended to intimidate, to harass, to perhaps even provoke into an action that would justify her arrest, had just demonstrated a level of control and a type of power they had utterly failed to anticipate. The easy mark was not so easy after all, and her big dog was something far more formidable than they could have ever imagined. The balance of power on that lonely cliff path had just shifted, dramatically and irrevocably. Their carefully planned intimidation had just backfired spectacularly, and as the last rays of the sunset painted the sky in apocalyptic colors, Sergeant Brody had the sickening realization that their quiet, secluded spot, chosen for its lack of witnesses, might now become the scene of a very different kind of report, one in which they were not the enforcers, but the ones who had monumentally, dangerously miscalculated. The tense standoff on Seal Point stretched for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely no more than 30 seconds. The only sounds were the relentless crash of waves on the rocks far below, the mournful cry of a distant gull, and Officer Fowler's continued, albeit now more subdued, whimpering as he nursed his non-existent injury, his pride clearly more wounded than his arm. Sergeant Brody and Officer Callahan remained frozen, their eyes darting between the implacable Dr. Aris Thorne and the equally implacable, silently watching Belgian Malinois, who stood as a formidable bulwark before her. The casual arrogance, the sneering contempt, the easy assumption of dominance, all had been stripped away from them, replaced by a potent cocktail of fear, shock, and a dawning, unwelcome respect for the woman and the animal they had so grievously underestimated. Dr. Thorne broke the silence, her voice still calm, but now carrying an undeniable edge of command, the voice of a scholar accustomed to dissecting complex issues with precision, now dissecting their egregious misconduct. "Sergeant Brody," she began, addressing him directly, her gaze unwavering, "you and your officers approached me in a concealed manner, in a remote location, after dark, without announcing your presence or your official purpose. You then proceeded to engage in a course of conduct that can only be described as targeted harassment and intimidation, based on what you falsely claimed were complaints about my dog, complaints which I sincerely doubt exist. You attempted to provoke my animal, and Officer Fowler then made an aggressive, unsolicited physical gesture towards him, which Valor, in accordance with his extensive protective training, interpreted as a direct threat to my person. His response was a measured, non-injurious defensive action designed to neutralize that perceived threat. Are we clear on the sequence of events so far, Sergeant?" Brody swallowed hard, his florid face now a shade paler in the twilight. He was a bully, accustomed to bluster and intimidation, not to being systematically dismantled by a woman whose intellect was clearly as formidable as her dog's protective instincts. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, words failing him. "I will take your silence as assent, Sergeant," Aris continued, her tone icy. "Now, Valor is a retired military working dog. His service record is exemplary. His training protocols, which I am intimately familiar with as my late husband was his handler, are designed to ensure handler protection with the minimum force necessary. Had Officer Fowler's intent been genuinely hostile and his actions more overtly threatening, Valor's response would have been significantly different and potentially tragic for Officer Fowler. You should all consider yourselves remarkably fortunate that Valor possesses such extraordinary discipline and control, even when faced with unprofessional provocation." She paused, letting her words sink in. The three officers remained statuesque, their earlier aggression completely deflated. Even the crickets seemed to have paused their evening chorus. "I am now going to continue my walk home," Aris announced, her voice firm. "Valor will remain at my side, on his leash. I expect you and your officers to remain here until we are well clear of this area. I will be making a formal complaint regarding this incident, this unwarranted, unprofessional, and, frankly, terrifying harassment, to the Port Royal Chief of Police, to the Mayor's office, and, if necessary, to the California Attorney General's office and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, first thing tomorrow morning. I will be detailing your badge numbers, which I have made a point of noting on previous occasions of your surveillance. I will also be describing in precise detail your tactics this evening. I trust that your body-worn cameras, Sergeant Brody, were active and recording this entire interaction as per departmental policy. The footage will no doubt prove illuminating." The mention of body cameras seemed to cause a fresh wave of consternation among the officers. Brody and Fowler exchanged a quick, panicked glance. Callahan looked down at his boots, his face grim. It was clear from their reactions that either the cameras had not been on or they knew the footage would be utterly damning. Aris didn't wait for their response. "Valor, heel," she commanded softly. The Malinois, with a final, lingering, and deeply intelligent look at the three chastened officers, moved seamlessly to her left side, his body brushing lightly against her leg, a comforting, solid presence. Dr. Aris Thorne then turned, with a dignity that was both profound and utterly unassailable, and began to walk back along the cliff path, away from Seal Point, towards the distant, welcoming lights of her home. She did not look back. She did not hurry. Her pace was measured, deliberate, the very picture of composure. But beneath the surface, her heart was still pounding, and a cold, righteous anger was solidifying into a resolute determination to see this through, not just for herself, but for anyone else who might have been, or might yet be, a target of these officers' abuse of power. As Aris and Valor disappeared into the deepening gloom, the three officers remained on the promontory, the silence between them thick and heavy, with unspoken recriminations and dawning fear. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind the bitter taste of humiliation and the cold dread of impending consequences. "Damn it, Brody!" Fowler finally exploded, his voice a shaky whisper. What the hell was that? Military dog. Formal complaint. DOJ. My arm still feels like he broke it, even if he didn't bite me. "Shut up, Fowler," Brody snarled, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. He was shaken, more shaken than he would ever admit. He had badly miscalculated. He had picked on the wrong woman and the wrong dog. He had assumed vulnerability and met an unexpected, formidable combination of intellect, courage, and highly specialized canine protection. "She's bluffing. She's just trying to scare us." "Bluffing," Callahan spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but edged with a weary cynicism. "Sergeant, did you see her eyes? Did you hear her voice? That woman isn't bluffing about anything. And that dog wasn't bluffing either. We screwed up, Brody. We screwed up big time." Brody glared at Callahan but offered no rebuttal. Deep down, he knew Callahan was right. The easy mark had turned the tables on them with an efficiency that was both terrifying and, in a strange, unwelcome way, almost admirable. Their little game of intimidation had gone spectacularly, dangerously wrong, and the reckoning, he suspected, was only just beginning. The walk back to wherever they had left their cruiser, if they had even brought one close, suddenly seemed like a very long and very bleak journey. The following morning, Dr. Aris Thorne, true to her word, began her campaign for accountability. She was not a woman who made idle threats. Her first call was to the office of Port Royal's Chief of Police, Martin Quaid. Chief Quaid was a relatively new appointee, brought in with a mandate to modernize the department and improve community relations after a series of minor scandals involving his predecessor. Aris, in her calm, precise academic manner, recounted the events of the previous evening, detailing the officers' behavior, their concealed approach, their harassing questions, the attempted provocation of Valor, Officer Fowler's aggressive gesture, and Valor's controlled, defensive response. She emphasized that she was not seeking retribution, but rather accountability and systemic change to ensure such abuses of power were not repeated. Chief Quaid, to his credit, listened with growing alarm and seriousness. He was aware of Sergeant Brody's reputation for aggressive tactics and had already fielded a couple of informal community concerns about him, though nothing as concrete or as potentially explosive as this. The involvement of a retired military working dog and the clear implication that the officers had potentially endangered themselves through unprofessional conduct added another layer of complexity. He promised Dr. Thorne a full and immediate internal affairs investigation, and he requested that she come in to provide a formal, detailed statement. He also significantly asked her if she would be willing to have Valor's military service and training records verified, to which Aris readily agreed, offering to provide all necessary documentation and contact information for Marcus's former commanding officer. Aris then contacted the mayor of Port Royal's office. Mayor Evelyn Hayes was a pragmatic, no-nonsense politician who valued her city's reputation for progressive civility. She too listened to Aris's account with considerable concern, particularly disturbed by the notion of her police officers engaging in what sounded like a premeditated act of harassment against a respected, though new, member of the community. She assured Aris of her full support for Chief Quaid's investigation and made it clear that she expected it to be thorough and impartial. The internal affairs investigation, spearheaded by a lieutenant known for his by-the-book approach, began almost immediately. Sergeant Brody, Officer Fowler, and Officer Callahan were formally interviewed. Their initial attempts to downplay the incident, to paint Dr. Thorne as an uncooperative individual and Valor as an inherently aggressive animal, quickly unraveled under scrutiny. Their stories had inconsistencies. Their body cameras, it turned out, had indeed been mysteriously malfunctioning or not activated during the critical period of the encounter, a convenient coincidence that IA investigators viewed with extreme skepticism. The lack of any official complaints about Dr. Thorne or Valor prior to the incident further undermined their narrative. Then came the verification of Valor's service. Marcus's former CO, now a highly decorated colonel at the Pentagon, not only confirmed Valor's distinguished service record and specialized protective training, but also expressed in no uncertain terms his profound disappointment that any law enforcement officers would conduct themselves in a manner that would necessitate such a defensive action from a highly disciplined MWD. He also subtly hinted at the potential for this incident to cause considerable embarrassment for the Port Royal PD if it were mishandled, given the military community's deep respect for its working dogs and their handlers. The tide turned decisively against Brody and his cohorts. Officer Callahan, perhaps seeing the writing on the wall, or perhaps finally finding his conscience, eventually provided a more truthful, though still self-serving account to IA, admitting that there had been no prior complaints, that their approach had been planned by Brody as a way to rattle Dr. Thorne, whom Brody had taken an irrational dislike to, and that Fowler's gesture towards Valor had been unprovoked. He painted himself as a reluctant participant, but his testimony was damning for Brody and Fowler. The culmination of the IA investigation was unequivocal. Sergeant Brody was found guilty of gross misconduct, abuse of authority, dereliction of duty for the body camera issue, and conduct unbecoming an officer. He was demoted from sergeant and given a lengthy suspension without pay, with a clear understanding that any further infractions would result in immediate termination. Officer Fowler, for his role in escalating the situation and his dishonesty during the investigation, also received a significant suspension and was permanently reassigned from patrol duties to a desk job in the records department, a humiliating demotion. Officer Callahan, due to his eventual cooperation, received a formal reprimand and mandatory retraining in de-escalation and ethical conduct. But Dr. Aris Thorne was not content with just individual disciplinary actions. She pushed, politely but relentlessly, for broader systemic changes. Working with Chief Quaid and, at Mayor Hayes's urging, a newly formed Citizens Advisory Council, she contributed her considerable intellect and insights into power dynamics to help revise the Port Royal PD's training protocols on community interaction, bias awareness, and specifically procedures for engaging with individuals accompanied by service or support animals. New guidelines were implemented, emphasizing respect, de-escalation, and a clear understanding of the rights of individuals and the roles of legitimate assistance animals. The Valor Protocol, as it became informally known within the department, stressed that an animal's breed or appearance alone was not grounds for suspicion, and that provoking a trained animal was not only unprofessional, but dangerously reckless. Dr. Aris Thorne continued her evening walks with Valor along the Port Royal cliffs. The trio of officers from Unit 7 were no longer a threatening presence. Other officers, now more aware of who she was and, more importantly, who Valor was, treated her with a newfound, if sometimes wary, respect. Aris never sought to be an activist, but her quiet courage, her intellectual fortitude, and the unwavering loyalty of her remarkable dog had inadvertently made her a catalyst for meaningful change in her adopted city. She had faced down intimidation not with aggression, but with an unshakable dignity and the quiet, formidable power of a protector who had indeed been trained for war, but whose greatest loyalty was to the peace and safety of the woman who held his leash and his heart. The unspoken bond between them had proven to be a far more effective deterrent than any weapon the officers carried. The harrowing encounter on Seal Point, where Dr. Aris Thorne and her retired military K-9 Valor were cornered by 3 police officers, serves as a potent reminder that prejudice and abuse of power can lurk even in the most idyllic settings. Sergeant Brody and his cohorts, operating under a toxic blend of bias and arrogance, saw Dr. Thorne not as a respected academic or a peaceful citizen, but as an easy mark, someone to be intimidated and controlled. They fundamentally misjudged her character, her intellect, and most critically, the nature and capabilities of her extraordinary canine companion. Valor was the hidden power in this narrative, a living, breathing testament to specialized training, unwavering loyalty, and the profound, unspoken bond between a handler and a military working dog. His response to Officer Fowler's provocation was not a random act of aggression, but a precisely calibrated defensive maneuver honed through years of rigorous conditioning to protect his charge from perceived threats. The officer's attempt to use intimidation tactics backfired spectacularly when confronted with a level of protective instinct and controlled capability they were utterly unprepared to face. They expected fear and submission. They encountered courage and a formidable silent challenge. Dr. Thorne's subsequent actions, her calm, articulate reporting of the incident, her insistence on accountability, and her contribution to systemic police reform demonstrate that true strength often lies not in retaliatory anger but in a principled, determined pursuit of justice.